A billionaire lived alone for 30 years, until she asked for a kiss he would not forget. For 3 decades, this man has feared the world, and feared himself even more. No one has touched him since he was a child, because he was told his touch was cursed. But everything changes the moment a quiet woman walks into his lonely mansion and asks him for something he's never given anyone. Just one kiss. A kiss she believes could break every lie he's ever lived under. But the moment their lips meet, something even more shocking happens. Because the curse isn't the only secret hiding in his house. Someone has been watching them. Someone who knows the truth about his past, and will do anything to keep it buried. If one kiss can expose a lifetime of lies, what will it cost them both to uncover the rest? Tell me in the comments where you're watching from right now, and if this story speaks to you, make sure you hit subscribe so you don't miss the next one. The morning sun crept over the snow-capped Colorado Rockies, painting Callum Vance's pristine estate in shades of amber and gold. Like every other day for the past 3 decades, Callum woke precisely at 6 o'clock, his king-sized bed feeling vast and empty around him. The silence in his bedroom was absolute, broken only by the soft whir of the air filtration system. He stretched his long frame, careful not to disturb the perfectly arranged blankets more than necessary. His morning routine was a well-orchestrated dance of solitude, one he had perfected over countless lonely days. The intercom beside his bed crackled to life right on schedule. "Good morning, Mr. Vance. Breakfast is prepared in the East dining room." The voice was professionally distant, just as he required. "Thank you, Margaret," he responded, his voice slightly rough from disuse. The walk to the dining room was silent, his bare feet padding across polished hardwood floors. The estate staff had already retreated, leaving his breakfast waiting on the massive oak table. One place setting. Always one. Callum sat down to his usual breakfast of steel-cut oats, fresh berries, and green tea. The morning light streamed through floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating dust motes that danced in the air. He ate methodically, his mind already cycling through the day's tasks, when his phone buzzed, an unexpected interruption to his carefully structured morning. "Callum," his lawyer's familiar voice came through the speaker, "we need to discuss your mother's letters." His hand stilled, spoon hovering above the bowl. "What about them, James?" "They need to be properly archived. Historical society requirements, plus some legal obligations we can't ignore any longer." There was a pause. "I'm sending someone over today, a librarian specializing in preservation. She comes highly recommended." Callum's chest tightened. "Today? That's not enough notice. I need time to prepare. She'll be there at 2 o'clock sharp." "Nova Rowe, she understands the confidentiality agreements and your particular requirements." The call ended before Callum could protest further. His appetite vanished as anxiety crawled up his spine. He pushed away from the table, his breakfast half finished, and retreated to his study to pace. The hours ticked by with excruciating slowness. Callum watched through security cameras as a modest sedan wound its way up his private drive at exactly 2 o'clock. His hands clenched into fists as he observed the woman step out of her car. She was younger than he expected, with kind eyes and an air of quiet confidence about her. Through the intercom, he heard Margaret greeting her at the door. "Welcome to the Vance estate, Miss Rowe. Please follow the sanitization protocols posted in the entryway." Callum watched Nova comply without question, carefully following each step. Something about her deliberate movements, her gentle demeanor, made his usual panic slightly less acute. Still, when Margaret led her to his study, he positioned himself in the furthest corner of the room. "Miss Rowe," he said, his voice steady despite his racing heart. "I must insist, no physical contact. Under any circumstances." The words were familiar, rehearsed countless times over the years. Nova's smile was soft, understanding. "Of course, Mr. Vance, I've been briefed on your preferences." She remained by the doorway, respecting his space. "Would you like to show me where the letters are kept?" He gestured to the wall of boxes, each containing pieces of his mother's life, her thoughts, her secrets. "Everything is there. My staff will assist if you need anything moved." Nova approached the boxes slowly, her movements careful and precise. Callum watched as she donned white cotton gloves before touching the first letter, handling it with reverence. The paper was yellowed with age, his mother's elegant handwriting flowing across the page. Hours passed as Nova worked, sorting and cataloguing. Callum found himself unable to leave, drawn to the quiet way she handled each piece of his past. He maintained his distance, but observed every movement from his position near the window. As evening shadows lengthened across the study floor, Margaret's voice came through the intercom. "Miss Rowe, your guest room is prepared. Shall I show you up?" Nova carefully placed the letter she was holding back in its box. "Thank you. That would be wonderful." She turned to Callum. "Would it be all right if I continue tomorrow, Mr. Vance? These letters deserve careful attention." He nodded, surprised to find himself somewhat reluctant to see her go. "Yes, of course. Whatever time you need." After Nova followed Margaret out, Callum remained in his study, staring at the boxes of letters. The room felt different somehow, less sterile, less empty. Her presence had shifted something in the carefully controlled atmosphere he'd maintained for so long, like a pebble creating ripples in a still pond. He walked to the box she'd been working on, careful not to touch anything she'd sorted. The scent of old paper mingled with a faint trace of something floral. Her perfume, perhaps. It was the first new scent his study had held in years. Returning to his usual chair, Callum realized this was the longest he'd stayed in the same room with another person in decades. His usual anxiety was present, but somehow muted, manageable. As night settled over the estate, he sat in the growing darkness, wondering why the arrival of this quiet librarian felt like the first breath of spring after an endless winter. The morning sun streamed through the library's tall windows, casting warm patches of light across the polished wooden floors. Nova settled into a comfortable leather armchair, surrounded by boxes of letters she'd brought from Callum's study. The Grand Library was a beautiful space, with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves and the kind of peaceful quiet that made her librarian's heart sing. She pulled on her cotton gloves and carefully lifted the first bundle of letters, tied with a faded blue ribbon. The paper was delicate, yellowed with age, but the handwriting remained clear and elegant. As she began to read, Nova found herself drawn into the world of Elizabeth Vance, Callum's mother. The early letters were filled with joy, describing a young Callum running through gardens, climbing trees, and laughing with other children. But as Nova worked through the chronological stack, she noticed a sharp change in tone around the time Callum turned 8 years old. "My darling boy hasn't left the house in weeks." One letter read, "The incident with little Sarah has frightened him so deeply. I tried to tell him it wasn't his fault, that her fainting had nothing to do with his innocent kiss, but he won't believe me." Nova's hands trembled slightly as she reached for another letter, but something caught her eye. At the bottom of the box, partially hidden beneath other papers, was a half-burned piece of paper. The edges were charred and brittle, but the words in the middle remained legible. "The curse was never real. I've protected this truth, knowing one day a woman brave enough will come. When she asks for his kiss, the walls he's built will finally crumble. My son will be free." Nova's heart pounded as she read the fragment several times. She carefully placed it in a separate folder, her mind racing with questions. Before she could delve deeper, the intercom crackled to life. "Miss Rowe." Margaret's voice was gentle. "Lunch is served in the conservatory. if you'd like to take a break." Nova found herself seated at a small table, surrounded by lush plants and natural light. Callum entered a few minutes later, taking his place at a separate table positioned exactly 15 feet away. She'd noticed his careful measuring of distances the day before. "I hope the library is comfortable enough," he said, his voice carrying across the space between them. Nova nodded, watching as he methodically arranged his silverware. "It's perfect. Your mother's letters are fascinating." She paused, gathering her courage. "May I ask you something personal, Mr. Vance?" His shoulders tensed, but he nodded slightly. "Why does physical touch frighten you so much?" she asked softly, careful to keep her tone gentle and free of judgment. The silence stretched between them for several long moments. Nova waited patiently, watching as Callum struggled with whether to answer. Finally he spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "I was 8 years old," he began, staring down at his untouched lunch. "There was a girl, Sarah Matthews. We were friends, always playing together in the garden." A sad smile flickered across his face. "One day I kissed her on the cheek. Just an innocent thing. The kind of kiss children give without thinking." He took a shaky breath. She collapsed immediately, just crumpled to the ground. She wasn't breathing right. Everyone was screaming, running. The ambulance came. His knuckles were white where he gripped his fork. She had an undiagnosed heart condition. No one knew, but the damage was done. "The adults?" he continued. "They started whispering about the old family curse, how the Vance men were cursed with a deadly touch. It had just been stories before, but suddenly everyone believed it. And so did I." His voice cracked slightly. "How could I not? I'd seen it with my own eyes." Nova's heart ached at the pain in his voice, at the decades of loneliness built on a child's misunderstanding. "Did Sarah recover?" she asked gently. "Yes." He nodded, but her parents moved away shortly after. I never saw her again. The rest of lunch passed in silence, but it felt different now, heavy with shared understanding. When Callum finally stood to leave, Nova noticed how his hands shook slightly as he pushed in his chair. Back in the library, Nova spread out the letters across a large table, creating a timeline. Elizabeth's writings spanned more than 2 decades, and as Nova carefully arranged them chronologically, patterns began to emerge. There were gaps, sometimes months long, where no letters existed. Certain phrases seemed to contradict earlier statements. And the tone. Something about the tone shifted drastically after Callum's isolation began. "My son must be protected from the truth," one letter from 1987 read. But just 2 years later, "The truth is his only protection." Nova made careful notes, documenting each inconsistency, each subtle shift in Elizabeth's words. The sun was setting when Margaret's voice came through the intercom again. "Miss Rowe, dinner will be served in 30 minutes. Nova looked at her scattered notes and the half-burned fragment she'd found earlier. Something wasn't adding up, and Elizabeth's words about one brave woman kept echoing in her mind. She carefully stored everything away, making sure the burned fragment was secure in its separate folder. As she prepared to leave the library, she glanced at a family portrait hanging above the fireplace. Young Callum smiled brightly at the camera, his mother's hands resting protectively on his shoulders. Nova's heart tightened at the joy in his expression, a joy that had been stolen by fear and misunderstanding. She touched her notes gently, thinking of the lonely man who ate lunch 15 feet away from everyone else. Somehow, Elizabeth's letters held the key to unraveling this decades-old web of isolation. Nova just had to figure out how all the pieces fit together. The mystery of the letters was beginning to feel like more than just a simple archiving job. As she walked to dinner, Nova couldn't shake the feeling that Elizabeth Vance had left these breadcrumbs deliberately, waiting for someone to follow them to their conclusion. The morning sun streamed through the library's tall windows, casting long shadows across the polished wooden floor. Nova sat at her usual desk, the half-burned note trembling slightly in her hands. She had rehearsed this conversation countless times during the night, but her heart still raced at the thought of sharing this discovery with Callum. The intercom buzzed softly. "Miss Rowe." It was Margaret's voice. "Mr. Vance will join you in the library shortly." "Thank you," Nova replied, smoothing the delicate paper one last time. When Callum entered, he maintained his customary distance, settling into an armchair across the room. Today he looked particularly tired, dark circles shadowing his eyes. "Good morning," he said quietly. Nova took a deep breath. "Mr. Vance, I found something yesterday that I think you need to see." She held up the fragile piece of paper. "It's a note from your mother, partially burned. The date suggests she wrote it near the end of her life." Callum's posture stiffened, but he nodded for her to continue. "I'll read it to you," Nova said gently. "My dearest son, I cannot bear to leave this world knowing you still believe in the curse. It was never real, just a terrible misunderstanding that grew into something monstrous. One day a brave woman will come to you and ask for a kiss. When you find the courage to give it, you'll see the truth. You were never cursed, Callum. Never." The silence that followed was deafening. Callum had gone completely still, his face pale. His hands gripped the arms of his chair so tightly his knuckles turned white. "That's impossible," he whispered finally. "I saw what happened to Sarah. You saw a little girl with an undiagnosed heart condition have an attack that coincidentally happened after an innocent kiss," Nova said softly. "The timing was tragic, but it wasn't cause and effect." Callum stood abruptly, beginning to pace the length of the room. "You don't understand. The stories about my family were just stories," Nova interrupted gently. "Stories that scared a little boy so badly he spent 30 years believing in them." He stopped pacing, running his hands through his hair in agitation. Even if there's a chance you're right, I can't risk it. I can't." Nova stood slowly, careful not to make any sudden movements. "Then let's test it, right here, right now." Callum's head snapped up, his eyes wide with fear. "What?" "One kiss," Nova said steadily, though her heart was pounding. "Just one small, soft kiss. If I'm wrong, I'll leave immediately and never bother you again. But if I'm right—" She let the words hang in the air. "No," Callum said immediately, resuming his pacing. "No, absolutely not. I won't risk your life on a theory." "It's my choice to make," Nova said quietly. "And I choose to believe in your mother's words. I choose to believe in you." Callum stopped again, his breathing uneven. For several long minutes he stood frozen, clearly wrestling with decades of fear against this new spark of hope. Nova waited patiently, letting him work through it at his own pace. Finally, so quietly she almost missed it, he whispered, "Okay." Nova's heart leaped, but she kept her movements slow and deliberate as she crossed the room. Callum watched her approach like a frightened animal ready to bolt, his whole body trembling. When she stood before him, close enough to see the flecks of gold in his brown eyes, she smiled encouragingly. "Just one small kiss," she reminded him softly. "Nothing more." Callum's breathing was ragged, but he managed a slight nod. Nova lifted her face toward his, standing perfectly still, letting him make the final move. For what felt like an eternity, neither of them moved. Then, with agonizing slowness, Callum leaned down. His lips brushed against hers, soft as a whisper, barely there at all before he jerked back. They both stood frozen, waiting. Seconds ticked by. Nova smiled, still standing steady on her feet. Still breathing. Still very much alive. Callum's legs gave out and he sank to his knees, his whole body shaking. "I'm not cursed," he whispered, the words coming out broken and raw. "I'm not... all this time." Nova knelt nearby, careful to give him space while staying close enough to offer comfort. "No, you're not cursed," she confirmed gently. "You never were." Tears streamed down Callum's face as 30 years of fear and isolation crashed down around him. He wrapped his arms around himself, rocking slightly as great, heaving sobs tore from his chest. Nova stayed with him, murmuring soft words of encouragement until the storm of emotion began to subside. When he finally looked up, his eyes were red but clearer than she'd ever seen them. "Would you like some tea?" she asked softly. "We can sit and talk, or just be quiet together for a while." He nodded, looking dazed but somehow lighter. They moved to the library's sitting area, where Nova rang for tea. When it arrived, they sat in companionable silence, watching the afternoon light paint golden patterns across the floor. As evening approached, Callum finally stirred from his contemplation. "I should retire for the night," he said, his voice hoarse but steady. I need time to think about all of this." Nova nodded, understanding. "Of course. Take all the time you need." He paused at the library door, turning back slightly. "Thank you," he whispered, before disappearing into the hallway. Nova watched him go, hoping she'd given him something he'd lost 30 years ago. Not just the truth, but the courage to believe in it. The morning sun streamed through the library's tall windows as Nova settled at her workstation, surrounded by stacks of carefully organized letters. After yesterday's breakthrough with Callum, she felt even more determined to understand the full story hidden in these pages. As she sorted through another batch of correspondence, something caught her eye. The letter she held was dated June 15th, 1992, but the next one in the sequence jumped to August 3rd. Nova frowned, checking her catalogue. According to her records, there should have been at least 4 letters between those dates. She pulled out her magnifying glass, examining the paper more closely. The edges of several pages showed slight discoloration, as if they'd been handled more recently than the others. Some had different creasing patterns, suggesting they'd been refolded by hands other than the original writers. "That's odd," Nova muttered, making careful notes. She compared the handwriting between letters, noting subtle inconsistencies in the loops and curves of certain words. In some places, the ink seemed fresher, darker than the surrounding text. Hours passed as Nova documented each irregularity. By early afternoon, she had filled several pages with observations. This wasn't just age or poor storage. Someone had deliberately altered these letters. When she heard Callum's familiar footsteps in the hallway, Nova gathered her courage. He needed to know. "Good afternoon," he said, keeping his customary distance, but with less tension than before. "How is the work progressing?" Nova took a deep breath. "Callum, I've found something concerning." She gestured to her notes. "Several of these letters appear to have been tampered with." "What?" He stepped closer, forgetting his usual caution. "That's impossible. No one has touched those letters since my mother died." "Look here," Nova said gently, pointing to specific examples. "See how the handwriting shifts slightly? And these gaps in the dating. There are missing pages. Some sections have been refolded differently than others." Callum leaned in, his face paling as he studied the evidence. "You're right," he whispered. "But how? When?" Together, they began cross-referencing dates and examining storage records. Nova noticed Callum's hands trembling as they worked. but his determination never wavered. "Here," he said suddenly, pointing to an entry. 3 years ago, there was a request for access to the family archives for tax purposes. I remember signing off on it, but I never actually saw anyone come in." Nova made another note. "Who had authorization besides you?" "Just my lawyer and the head of household staff." Callum ran a hand through his hair. "I trusted them completely." "Sometimes trust can be misplaced," Nova said softly. "But finding this means we're closer to understanding what really happened." Callum was quiet for a long moment, then seemed to come to a decision. Would you join me for dinner tonight, in the conservatory?" His voice was hesitant but hopeful. "We could talk more about what you found." Nova smiled warmly. "I'd like that very much." The conservatory was beautiful in the evening light, its glass walls reflecting the sunset while protecting them from the mountain chill. A small table had been set with fine china and crystal glasses, and Nova noticed Callum had positioned their chairs at a comfortable distance while still allowing conversation. As they ate, their discussion flowed naturally from the letters to deeper topics. Nova watched Callum gradually relax, sharing memories of his mother and his struggles with isolation. "I built walls to protect others," he admitted, "but they became my prison instead." "Faith isn't just about believing in God," Nova responded thoughtfully. "Sometimes it's about believing in yourself and in the possibility of healing." Callum nodded slowly. "Yesterday, when you helped me face my fears, it was the first time in 30 years I felt hope." Their conversation continued until the stars became visible through the glass ceiling. When they finally said goodnight, Nova noticed Callum's smile reached his eyes for the first time since they'd met. Back in her guest room, Nova opened her laptop to draft her findings report. She carefully documented each irregularity in the letters, adding her theories about possible motivations for the tampering. As she finished, she clicked to save the file to her secured drive. Suddenly, a message popped up on her screen. The words made her blood run cold. "Stop digging or you'll end up like his mother." Nova stared at the threatening message, her heart pounding in her chest. The cursor blinked steadily on the screen, but she couldn't move. Around her, the grand house was silent, its occupants unaware of the menace that had just invaded their sanctuary. Her hands shook as she read the words again, the implications becoming clearer with each passing second. Someone was watching. Someone knew what she'd discovered. And someone was willing to kill to keep their secrets. The moonlight cast long shadows across her room as Nova sat frozen before the glowing screen, terror wrapping around her like a cold shroud as the house slept on. The morning sun had barely crested the mountains when Nova made her way to Callum's study, her laptop clutched tightly against her chest. Her heart raced as she approached his door, knowing the news she carried would shatter his sense of security. She knocked softly. "Callum, I need to show you something important." "Come in," he called, his voice muffled through the heavy oak door. Nova entered, finding him at his desk reviewing papers. Even after yesterday's breakthrough, he maintained a careful distance, but his eyes were warmer now when they met hers. "What's wrong?" he asked, noticing her troubled expression. Nova opened her laptop and turned it to face him. "This message appeared on my screen last night when I was saving my research notes." Callum leaned forward to read, his face draining of color. His hands gripped the edge of his desk so tightly his knuckles turned white. This is impossible. My security systems are state-of-the-art. No one unauthorized should have access." "Someone does," Nova said gently. "And they're watching what we're doing." Callum pressed a button on his intercom. "I need the security logs for the past 24 hours. All systems." His voice shook slightly, but held firm. They spent the next several hours poring over digital records, looking for any sign of intrusion. Nova noticed Callum's hands trembling as he scrolled through screen after screen of data. "There," she pointed, around 11 o'clock. "Look at these access patterns. They're different from the regular system checks." Callum nodded grimly. "Remote interference. Someone's been piggybacking on our routine maintenance connections." He ran a hand through his hair, distress evident in every movement. "All these years I thought I was protecting everyone by staying isolated. But what if I've just been making it easier for someone to control everything?" Nova placed her hand near his on the desk, not touching, but offering silent support. Sometimes the walls we build to keep ourselves safe can also keep us from seeing the truth. After a quick lunch that neither of them really ate, Nova returned to the letters while Callum worked with his security team to trace the breach. The afternoon light streamed through the library windows as she carefully unfolded another batch of his mother's correspondence. A pattern began to emerge in the careful words. References to watching eyes and false friends appeared more frequently in the later letters. One passage made Nova's breath catch. "My dearest son, if you're reading this, know that your fears were never your fault. Someone close to us has been feeding this lie, making you believe in a curse that doesn't exist. I pray someday you'll find the strength to question what you've been told." The letter ended abruptly, the bottom portion torn away. Nova carefully documented it with her phone, knowing better now than to trust the estate's computer systems. As dusk approached, she found Callum in the great room, staring into the crackling fireplace. The flames cast dancing shadows across his troubled face. "Your mother left more clues," Nova said softly, settling into a chair nearby. "She knew someone was manipulating you, Callum. She tried to leave. Breadcrumbs for you to follow. I was too afraid to question anything." He whispered. "The curse felt so real. Everyone around me believed it, or at least they made me think they did." Nova watched the flames reflect in his eyes. "Your mother wrote about courage often in her letters, not as something bold or dramatic, but as small choices to face truth even when it's scary." She paused, choosing her next words carefully. "Callum, are you sure you want to keep digging? The truth behind all this, it might be painful." He was quiet for a long moment, the fire crackling softly in the silence. Finally, he turned to meet her gaze. "Yes," he said firmly. "I've lived in fear for 30 years because someone wanted me to. I need to know why." Nova nodded, understanding both his determination and his fear. "Then we'll find out together." Later that night, Nova sat alone in the library, comparing dates and names across dozens of letters spread out on the massive oak table. The house had grown quiet, most of the staff retired for the evening. Only the soft tick of the grandfather clock and the occasional creak of old wood broke the silence. A floorboard creaked in the hallway outside the library door. Nova's head snapped up, her heart suddenly pounding. The sound had been too deliberate for random house settling. "Hello," she called out, her voice wavering slightly. "Is someone there?" No answer came, just heavy silence pressing in around her, another soft footstep. "Callum," she tried again. "Is that you?" The silence stretched on, broken only by her rapid breathing and the steady tick-tock of the clock. The morning sun struggled to pierce through heavy clouds as Nova made her way to breakfast, her shoulders tense from a restless night. She found Callum already in the dining room, looking equally tired. "Someone was in the hallway last night," she said without preamble. "Outside the library. They didn't answer when I called out." Callum's face paled. "That's impossible. The security system—" He pressed the intercom button. "Double the patrols immediately. Check all access points." "Yes, sir," came the crisp response. Nova watched him grip his coffee cup tightly. Could someone have gotten past the security? They shouldn't be able to. He insisted, but doubt clouded his eyes. The staff all have strict schedules and boundaries. No one should have been near the library that late. After breakfast, Nova returned to her work, trying to focus despite feeling watched. As she opened another box of letters, she found a bundle tied with faded blue ribbon, different from the others. The handwriting was strange, letters and numbers mixed together in what appeared to be a pattern. "These are coded," she whispered to herself, spreading them across the table. Her mind raced back to her library training in historical documents. The cipher looked familiar, a simple substitution code common in the 1980s. Hour after hour, she carefully translated the messages. Her hands shook as the truth emerged. Callum's mother had been tracking money movements, large sums being diverted through shell companies. The word Maxwell appeared repeatedly, along with mentions of falsified documents. "What were you investigating?" Nova murmured, scanning another decoded page. "What did you find that—" The library door swung open suddenly. Nova jumped, her heart racing. A tall, elegant woman in her 60s swept in, her grey hair perfectly styled, and her designer outfit immaculate. Her sharp eyes took in the scene with obvious disapproval. "Well," she said coldly, "this is certainly unexpected." "Aunt Marion." Callum appeared in the doorway behind her, his posture stiff. "You didn't tell me you were coming. Do I need permission to check on my nephew?" Marion's smile didn't reach her eyes. "Especially when I hear you have a guest staying here. Rather unprecedented, isn't it?" Nova stood carefully, aware of the coded letters scattered before her. "I'm Nova Rowe, the archivist cataloguing Mrs. Vance's letters." "Yes, I'm sure you are." Marion's tone dripped with skepticism. She turned to Callum. "Darling, you know how dangerous it is having strangers here. What if something were to happen?" "Nothing has happened," Callum said firmly. "Nova's work is important." "Is it?" Marion wandered closer to the table, her perfectly manicured nails trailing across the wood. "These old letters hardly seem worth the risk. Besides, I thought Maxwell had already organized everything after your mother passed." Nova saw Callum stiffen. "Maxwell never mentioned organizing the letters. You told me they hadn't been touched." A flicker of something, alarm, crossed Marion's face before her smile returned. "Did I? One forgets these little details after so many years. Speaking of Maxwell, he sends his regards. Such a shame he couldn't join me today." "You said yesterday he was in Europe," Callum challenged, his voice growing stronger. "When did you speak with him?" Marion's composure cracked slightly. "Well, I really must go check into my hotel. The drive up here was exhausting." She headed for the door, pausing to look back at Nova. "Do be careful, dear. Accidents happen so easily in old houses like this." After she left, the tension in the room slowly dissipated. Nova released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "I'm sorry about her," Callum said quietly. "She's always been protective. She's always insisted the curse was real, hasn't she?" He nodded slowly. "She and Maxwell both. They were the ones who convinced everyone after that girl fainted. Said it ran in the family, that I had to be careful." His voice trailed off as realization dawned. "They're the ones who kept me isolated." That evening, they shared another dinner in the conservatory. The glass ceiling revealed heavy clouds gathering above, matching their somber mood. "The coded letters," Nova said carefully. "Your mother was investigating, something about Maxwell and missing money before she died." Callum set down his fork. "I need to see them." "Not tonight," Nova said firmly. "I've hidden them somewhere safe. After that visit from your aunt." She met his eyes. "We need to be more careful." He nodded, understanding. Thank you for helping me see what I've been too afraid to look at all these years. Later, in her room, Nova double-checked that the coded letters were secure in their new hiding place, inside a hollow book she'd noticed on a dusty shelf. Her hands trembled slightly as she closed the cabinet. The truth was getting closer, but so was the danger. Yet, looking back at the day's events, she knew they couldn't stop now. Callum deserved to know who had stolen 30 years of his life, and why. She prepared for bed, acutely aware of every creak and whisper in the old house. Tomorrow would bring more answers, but also more risks. Nova set her jaw determinedly. They would face them together. The morning sun painted golden streaks across the library floor as Nova sorted through another bundle of letters. The peaceful quiet was broken by Callum's hurried footsteps approaching. "Nova?" His face was drawn with worry as he entered. "I just got off the phone with my lawyer. Maxwell Reeve has been asking questions about the archival project." Nova's stomach tightened. "What kind of questions?" "He wanted to know why we're going through Mother's letters now, who authorized it." Callum ran a hand through his hair. He shouldn't even know about this project. Unless someone told him. Nova said softly, thinking of Aunt Marian's visit. They spread the remaining coded letters across the broad oak table. Nova had discovered the pattern. Every third word held meaning, creating hidden messages within innocent-seeming family updates. Hour after hour, they worked together, piecing together the truth. "Look at this," Nova said, pointing to a decoded section. "Maxwell diverted 3 million through shell companies. Have proof. Must act quickly." She swallowed hard. "This was dated just 2 weeks before your mother died." Callum's hands trembled as he read another decoded passage. "We'll expose everything tomorrow. Pray for courage." That was her last letter. She never got the chance, Nova said gently. The next day they said she had a heart attack. Callum's voice was hollow. "I always thought it was strange. She was so healthy." By lunchtime, they had decoded enough to paint a clear picture. Callum's mother had discovered Maxwell embezzling massive amounts from the family company. She had gathered evidence and planned to expose him. Then she died suddenly, conveniently before she could reveal anything. After their simple lunch, Nova felt suffocated by the weight of their discoveries. "I need some air," she said. "Just a short walk in the gardens." Callum nodded, following her to the terrace but staying behind as she descended the stone steps. Nova breathed in, deeply, letting the crisp mountain air clear her head. The estate's manicured garden stretched before her, bordered by towering pines. As she walked the gravel paths, her librarian's eye for detail noticed something odd near the back service gate. Fresh tire tracks in the mud, cutting through the grass where vehicles weren't supposed to go. The tracks weren't from the usual delivery vehicles that used the main drive. Nova hurried back to the terrace where Callum waited. "Someone's been on the grounds," she reported, describing the tracks. "Recently." His face hardened with concern. "That gate is supposed to be locked at all times." He pulled out his phone, quickly texting his security team. "I want you to stay inside until we secure the property. Please." The genuine worry in his voice touched her. "All right," she agreed. "But we can't hide from this forever, Callum." That evening, they sat in the library's comfortable leather chairs, sharing mint tea as the fire crackled softly. The security sweep had found no intruders, but the unease lingered. "How do you do it?" Callum asked suddenly. "Stay so hopeful?" Nova considered her answer carefully. "I believe in redemption," she said. "That no matter how long we've believed something false, healing is possible. It's never too late for truth." "Even after 30 years?" His voice was barely a whisper. especially then. She met his gaze steadily. Faith isn't about time. It's about being brave enough to try again. Something shifted in his eyes, a spark of possibility replacing old fear. Nova felt her heart warm at the sight, aware of her growing feelings for this gentle, wounded man. She couldn't pinpoint exactly when protecting him had become so personally important to her. Later that night, Nova organized the decoded letters chronologically in her room, piecing together the final months of Callum's mother's life. The truth was there in black and white, a mother's desperate attempt to protect her son and expose a criminal, cut short by what now seemed clearly to be murder. In his own room down the hall, Callum lay awake, staring at the ceiling. Hope was an unfamiliar sensation, uncomfortable yet magnetic. Like a flower turning toward sunlight after too long in darkness, he found himself drawn toward its possibility. Sleep eluded him as his mind turned over 30 years of lies, wondering what other truths waited to be discovered. The decoded letters sat in their hiding place, their secrets finally revealed. But the most important revelation wasn't about Maxwell's crimes. It was the simple fact that change was possible, that perhaps a life built on fear could be dismantled and rebuilt on something stronger. Truth, courage, and maybe even love. The early morning sun cast long shadows through the library windows as Nova carefully spread the decoded letters across the massive oak table. She had woken before dawn, her mind refusing to rest until every piece of the puzzle was perfectly clear. The soft whisper of paper filled the quiet room as she arranged the letters chronologically, creating a timeline of Callum's mother's final months. A gentle knock made her look up. Callum stood in the doorway, already dressed for the day in a crisp blue shirt and dark slacks. His presence had grown steadily more natural in the library over the past few days. "I heard you were already working," he said softly. "May I join you?" Nova smiled warmly. "Of course. I'm trying to make sure we haven't missed anything important." Callum pulled up a chair, careful to maintain a comfortable distance while still being close enough to read. Together, they began reviewing the decoded messages, filling in gaps in the timeline. "Look at this entry from March." Nova pointed. "Your mother wrote about confronting Maxwell at a board meeting. She had proof of at least 4 shell companies he was using to funnel money away from your family's business." Callum leaned forward, his eyes scanning the careful handwriting. "She was so brave," he whispered. "All those years I thought she was just busy with work, but she was fighting for the truth." Nova watched emotion play across his face. "She was fighting for you too, Callum. Every letter shows how much she wanted to protect you." They worked through the morning, piecing together the full story. Maxwell had been stealing millions through elaborate schemes. Callum's mother had discovered the fraud and gathered evidence. But before she could expose him, she had died suddenly, and the curse story had conveniently kept Callum isolated and unable to investigate. "I can't believe I never questioned it," Callum said, his voice thick with pain. 30 years of believing I couldn't touch anyone, couldn't have a normal life, all because of lies." Nova reached toward him instinctively, stopping just short of touching his arm. "You were a child who trusted the adults around you. That's not your fault. But I'm not a child anymore." His jaw tightened with determination. "It's time I faced the truth." The library door burst open, making them both jump. Aunt Marion swept in, her designer heels clicking sharply on the hardwood floor. Her face was flushed with anger. "What is going on here?" she demanded. "Callum, I've been hearing disturbing reports about you letting this librarian fill your head with nonsense." Callum stood slowly, something steely entering his normally gentle expression. "They're not nonsense, Aunt Marion. They're facts. Facts about Maxwell's embezzlement, about Mother's investigation, about her death. "How dare you?" Marion's voice rose shrilly. "After everything I've done to protect you, protect me?" Callum's voice was quiet but firm. "Or control me. The letters have been tampered with. Pages removed, dates changed. Did you help Maxwell cover up what really happened to my mother?" Marion's face went white. For a moment she seemed unable to speak. Then she grabbed her purse, hands shaking. "I won't stand here and listen to these accusations. You're clearly not well, Callum. That girl has poisoned your mind." "No," Callum said. "For the first time in 30 years, my mind is clear. I want answers, Aunt Marion, real ones." Marion stormed out without another word, leaving a tense silence in her wake. Nova stood carefully, giving Callum space to process the confrontation. "Are you all right?" she asked softly. He nodded slowly. "Yes, actually I feel stronger, like I'm finally standing up for myself." They shared a quiet lunch in the conservatory, surrounded by flowering plants and natural light. Callum seemed lost in thought, occasionally glancing at Nova with an unreadable expression. Finally he spoke. "Nova, would you mind if I tried kissing you again, just to be absolutely certain?" Her heart skipped a beat at the vulnerability in his request. "Of course," she said gently. "Whenever you're ready." Callum moved his chair closer, his hands trembling slightly. Nova stayed still, letting him set the pace. When he leaned in, she closed her eyes. The kiss was soft, tender, and lingering, nothing like their brief test kiss days ago. Nova felt Callum's initial tension melt away as he realized, once again, that nothing bad would happen. When they finally parted, his eyes were bright with joy. 30 years, he whispered. "I never thought I could have this." That evening found them back in the library, talking quietly by the fire. They discussed hopes, dreams, and possibilities neither had dared imagine before. Callum spoke about maybe traveling, experiencing the world he'd hidden from for so long. Nova shared stories about her work at the community library, the simple joy of connecting people with books they loved. Neither noticed the tiny camera hidden in the corner bookshelf, its lens recording their every move. Late that night, Nova made her way back to her guest room, her mind full of shared conversations and that life-changing kiss. She changed into her night clothes and settled into bed, unaware that somewhere in the darkness someone was watching her every movement through surveillance feeds, planning their next move. The warmth of the day's victories had no way of warning her about the danger that lurked in the shadows, waiting to strike. Sunlight streamed through the conservatory windows as Nova and Callum shared breakfast together. The morning air felt crisp and clean, filled with possibility. It was their first time starting the day this way. Nova noticed how Callum seemed more relaxed, his shoulders less tense as he buttered his toast. "The fresh berries are wonderful," Nova said, enjoying the simple pleasure of sharing a meal. "Your greenhouse staff does amazing work." Callum smiled, a sight that was becoming less rare. "They'll be happy to hear that, though I suspect they're more excited about seeing me actually eating with someone for the first time in decades." After breakfast, Nova returned to the library, diving back into her cataloguing work. The morning sun warmed the rich wooden shelves as she carefully sorted through another box of letters. Her methodical process had become second nature over the past days. But then she found it, a folder tucked between two bundles of correspondence. Inside were financial documents, carefully preserved. Nova's hands trembled as she read through them. The numbers told a clear story. Millions of dollars systematically siphoned from Callum's family business through a complex web of fake accounts. All of them led back to Maxwell Reeve. "Callum?" she called through the intercom. "I need you to see this." He arrived quickly, his face concerned. Nova spread the documents across the large oak table. "Look at these transaction records," she said quietly. "Your mother found proof of Maxwell's fraud. These shell companies, these irregular transfers, it's all here. She documented everything." Callum sank into a chair, his face ashen as he examined page after page of evidence. "All this time," he whispered. "He stole from us, then he—" His voice broke. Nova's heart ached for him. "We need to take this to the authorities," she said gently. "Your mother wanted the truth to come out. That's why she preserved these records." He nodded slowly, straightening his shoulders. "You're right. First thing tomorrow morning, we'll contact the Financial Crimes Unit. I won't let him get away with this any longer." They spent the next hour organizing the documents, preparing everything for the authorities. When Nova's laptop battery ran low, she plugged it in to charge and stepped out briefly to use the restroom. Upon returning, she stopped short in the doorway. Her laptop had been moved several inches to the left of where she'd left it. "Callum," she called out, trying to keep her voice steady. "Did you come in while I was gone?" He appeared in the doorway, frowning. "No, I've been in my study on a call. Why?" Nova's pulse quickened. "Someone moved my laptop. I'm certain of it." Callum's face hardened. "Search the room," he ordered. "Thoroughly." They began examining every shelf, every corner. Nova was checking behind a row of leather-bound volumes when she spotted it. A small black device no bigger than a button, tucked against the wall. "Callum?" she said softly. "Look." He came closer, his expression darkening as he saw the listening device. Without a word, he went to the intercom and called security. Within minutes, the estate's security team was sweeping every room for additional devices, while Callum upgraded the alarm systems. "I'm so sorry," he told Nova as they watched the security team work. "I should have realized he wouldn't give up so easily." "This isn't your fault," she assured him. "Maxwell's desperate because he knows we're close to exposing him." Evening settled over the estate as they reviewed the financial documents together in Callum's study. The security team had found and removed 3 more listening devices throughout the house. Nova could see the toll the day's discoveries had taken on Callum. His face was drawn with fatigue and worry. When the grandfather clock struck 10, Callum insisted on walking Nova to her room, though he maintained his usual careful distance. They paused outside her door, neither quite ready to say goodnight. "Thank you," he said softly, "for helping me face the truth, for showing me I'm not cursed, for everything." Nova smiled gently. "Thank you for being brave enough to question what you've always believed. That takes real courage." He lingered a moment longer, clearly reluctant to leave, before wishing her good night and heading back down the hall. In her room, Nova changed into her nightclothes and sat at the small desk, opening her laptop to draft a secure message documenting their findings. But something felt off. The air seemed too still, the silence too complete. Her fingers hesitated over the keyboard as unease crept up her spine. Despite the upgraded security, despite the sweeps and checks, she couldn't shake the feeling that someone else was still inside the estate. Someone waiting, watching, biding their time. Morning light streamed through the library windows as Nova arranged the final pieces of evidence. Her fingers moved quickly over the keyboard, summarizing the complex web of financial fraud they'd uncovered. The documents formed an undeniable case against Maxwell Reeve, proof of his systematic theft and manipulation spanning decades. "I've gathered the key transaction records," Callum said from across the room, his voice steady despite the tension evident in his shoulders. He placed a thick folder on the table. "These show the money trail through all the shell companies." Nova nodded, glancing up from her laptop. "Good. I'm almost finished with the timeline showing how your mother discovered the fraud. She rubbed her tired eyes. It's all here. How Maxwell used the curse story to isolate you. How he worked with Marion to keep you afraid of human contact. They needed you disconnected from everyone to maintain control of the business. Callum's hands trembled slightly as he sorted through more papers. 30 years of lies, he said quietly. And my mother died trying to expose the truth. But she left us the evidence we needed, Nova reminded him gently. She made sure the truth would come out eventually. They worked steadily through the morning, preparing everything for their 2 o'clock meeting with the Financial Crimes Unit. Around noon, Nova felt exhaustion settling into her bones. I should rest for an hour before the investigators arrive, she said, standing and stretching. My mind needs to be sharp when we present all this. Callum looked up, concern crossing his features. Of course, I'll have security do another sweep of the grounds while you rest. Nova headed to her room, her footsteps echoing in the quiet hallway. Inside, she kicked off her shoes and lay down, not bothering to close the door completely. The emotional weight of the past days caught up with her, and she drifted off almost immediately. When she woke, the quality of light had changed. Warmer later in the day. Nova blinked, disoriented, and noticed her door standing slightly ajar. She frowned, certain she'd left it nearly closed. A draft, perhaps? But the windows were sealed, and the air felt unnaturally still. Unease prickled along her spine as she got up and checked her phone. Past 6 o'clock. She'd slept far longer than intended. The meeting with investigators must have been rescheduled. She should find Callum, touch base about their next steps. Meanwhile, in another part of the estate, Callum paced the dining room. He'd asked the staff to prepare dinner for 2 in the conservatory, their usual spot now, but Nova hadn't appeared. It wasn't like her to be late without sending word. Has anyone seen Ms. Rowe? He asked through the intercom. Not since midday, sir, came the reply. Worry gnawed at him as he headed toward the library. The room was empty, but Nova's laptop sat open on the table, screensaver swirling across the screen. Papers lay scattered across the surface, not like Nova's typically meticulous organization. His heart stopped when he saw the note placed deliberately atop the chaos. Simple white paper, black ink, 5 words that shattered his world. She should have stopped digging. No, he whispered, then louder. No! He slammed the intercom button. Security, check every room, every corner of the grounds. Ms. Rowe is missing. The next hours passed in a blur of frantic searching. Every room empty. No signs of forced entry. No response from Nova's phone. She had vanished from within his supposedly secure walls. As midnight approached, Callum sat alone in his study, destroyed. The person he'd finally opened his heart to, the woman who'd shown him he wasn't cursed, taken. Because of him. Because she'd tried to help him. I was wrong, he whispered into the darkness, his voice breaking. The curse is real. Not the one I believed in, but worse. Everyone who gets close to me ends up hurt. First my mother, now Nova. He buried his face in his hands, shoulders shaking. Nova. He breathed, her name like a prayer in the silent room. Nova, I'm so sorry. The grandfather clock struck midnight, each chime echoing through the empty halls. Somewhere in the vast estate, security teams continued their futile search. But Callum remained motionless in his study, drowning in guilt and grief, whispering Nova's name into the darkness that seemed to mock his brief glimpse of happiness. Scattered around him lay the evidence they'd gathered, the truth they'd uncovered together, now tainted by the price of discovery. The price Nova had paid for believing in him, for helping him face his fears, for showing him love was possible. Nova. He whispered one final time. the sound swallowed by shadows as the last clock chime faded to silence. Dawn crept across Callum's estate, painting long shadows through windows that had witnessed his decades of isolation. He hadn't slept, couldn't sleep. His body trembled with exhaustion and fear as he paced the length of his bedroom for the 100th time, his sock-covered feet silent on the hardwood floors. Nova was gone, taken, because of him. The morning light grew stronger, but Callum barely noticed. His thoughts spiraled endlessly through guilt and self-blame. If he hadn't let her stay, if he hadn't opened up to her, if he hadn't kissed her. The intercom buzzed softly. "Sir." The head of security's voice was gentle but firm. "We've completed another sweep of the grounds. Still no sign of Ms. Rowe or any clues to her whereabouts." Callum pressed the button with a shaking hand. "Thank you. Keep looking." His voice sounded hollow, even to his own ears. Unable to stay in his room any longer, he made his way to the library. The space felt different now, colder, emptier without Nova's quiet presence. Papers still lay scattered across the tables where they'd worked together. Her reading glasses sat forgotten near a stack of letters. He sank into the chair she usually occupied, running his fingers over the decoded pages she'd worked so hard to understand. Her neat handwriting filled the margins with observations, questions, connections she'd made. Even her notes showed her thoughtful nature, her determination to uncover the truth. "I'm sorry," he whispered to the empty room. "I'm so sorry, Nova." As he gathered the papers into neater piles, something she would have done, his hand brushed against a thick, leather-bound book. It shifted slightly, and an envelope slipped from between its pages. Callum froze. The envelope was plain white, unmarked except for his name written in Nova's familiar handwriting. With trembling fingers, he opened it and found a small digital recorder inside. His heart pounding, he pressed play. Nova's voice filled the quiet library, strong and clear despite the recording's softness. "Truth requires courage. Choose courage, Callum. Not fear." The message was brief, but hearing her voice shattered something inside him. She had known. Somehow she had known the danger was real, had left this message for him to find. Not a cry for help, but a call to action. "Choose courage," she had said. The words echoed in his mind, cutting through the fog of despair that had gripped him since discovering her disappearance. She was right. He couldn't hide anymore, couldn't let fear paralyze him while Nova was in danger. Moving with sudden purpose, Callum went to his study and pulled out a business card he hadn't touched in years. It belonged to a security investigator he'd hired once before, someone whose discretion and skills he trusted completely. His hands shook as he dialed the number, but his voice was steady. "This is Callum Vance. I need your help. Someone has been taken from my estate." The investigator arrived within 2 hours, professional and focused. Callum handed over everything Nova had uncovered: the decoded letters, the evidence of financial fraud, the threatening messages she'd received. "Show me your surveillance systems," the investigator requested, and Callum led them to the security room. They spent hours reviewing footage and finally found what they needed. At 3:47 in the afternoon the previous day, a dark van had slipped through the service gate, the same gate where Nova had noticed suspicious tire tracks. "That's our lead," the investigator said quietly. "The van's plates are visible in this frame. We can track its movement through traffic cameras." Callum stared at the frozen image on the screen, his hands clenched into fists. Nova was in that van. While he'd been waiting for her in the conservatory, she'd been taken right from under his roof. "What do we do next?" he asked. The investigator turned to face him fully. "We follow every lead, every trace. But Mr. Vance, this will require leaving the estate. Are you prepared for that?" Callum didn't hesitate. "Yes." The word came out firm, certain. I haven't left these grounds in 30 years, but I'm not letting that stop me now. Nova risked everything to help me face the truth. I won't abandon her to save myself. He returned to his rooms and began packing a small bag. Essentials only. Clothes, medication, the recorder with Nova's message. His hands still shook, but there was strength in his movements now. Purpose. As he zipped the bag closed, he caught his reflection in the window. The same face that had hidden from the world for 3 decades looked back at him, but something had changed in his eyes. Fear still lurked there, but it no longer ruled him. Nova's voice echoed in his mind again. Choose courage, Callum, not fear. He squared his shoulders and picked up his bag. It was time to step beyond his self-imposed prison. Time to fight for the woman who had shown him that love was stronger than fear. The setting sun painted the mountains in shades of gold and purple as Callum stood in his foyer, ready to leave. Outside, the investigator waited in a discreet black SUV. Soon they would be tracking the van, following Nova's trail wherever it led. I'm coming, he whispered, his promise carried away by the evening breeze. Hold on, Nova, I'm coming. The black SUV wound its way down the mountain road, each curve bringing Callum further from his sanctuary than he'd been in 30 years. His fingers dug into the leather seat as anxiety clawed at his chest. The world felt too big, too open, too unpredictable. Try to breathe steadily, the investigator said quietly from behind the wheel. Focus on why we're doing this. Nova. Callum closed his eyes and pictured her gentle smile, heard her voice on the recorder. Choose courage, Callum, not fear. He forced air into his lungs, counting breaths like she had taught him during their talks in the library. The investigator kept his voice calm and professional. The van's route was tracked through multiple traffic cameras. It led to an industrial area owned by Maxwell Reeves Company. He glanced at Callum. Does that name mean anything to you? Yes, Callum said through clenched teeth. He was my mother's business rival. Nova found evidence that he was stealing from the company before my mother died. The sky darkened as they drove, the familiar mountains giving way to city outskirts. Each mile tested Callum's resolve. His hands trembled as unfamiliar sensations bombarded him. The vehicle's motion, the changing air pressure, the noise of other cars. But whenever panic threatened to overwhelm him, he thought of Nova alone and afraid, waiting for help. We're getting close, the investigator announced as they turned into an industrial park. The warehouse is just ahead. Remember what we discussed. Stay quiet, follow my lead, and if anything goes wrong, get back to the car immediately. Callum nodded, his throat too tight for words. The SUV rolled to a stop in a shadowed area behind some shipping containers, out of sight from the main building. The warehouse loomed against the darkening sky, its metal walls reflecting the last orange rays of sunset. Loading docks gaped like empty mouths along one side. A few security lights cast pools of harsh illumination near the entrances. There's the van, the investigator whispered, pointing to a dark vehicle partially hidden behind the building. They moved carefully through the shadows, checking cameras and sight lines as they approached. Callum's heart hammered so hard he feared it would give them away. Everything felt wrong. The open space, the unfamiliar territory, the knowledge that he was walking straight toward danger instead of hiding from it. But Nova needed him. That thought drove him forward, one silent step at a time. They found a side door with a small window and peered inside. Callum's breath caught in his throat. There she was, Nova, tied to a chair in the center of the open warehouse floor. 2 men in dark clothes stood guard nearby, both armed. She appeared unhurt, but tired, her head bowed forward. Wait, the investigator breathed, pulling Callum back as voices approached from inside. Through the door's window, They watched Maxwell Reeve stride into view, his expensive suit incongruous in the industrial setting. Behind him hurried Marion, her usual composure cracking. "This is your fault," Maxwell snapped at her. "You had one job, keep him isolated and controlled. Now everything's falling apart because you couldn't handle one nosy librarian. Don't you dare blame me." Marion's voice shook with rage. "I've spent 30 years maintaining that cursed story, keeping him dependent and afraid. You're the one who panicked and escalated things." "Because she found proof." Maxwell ran a hand through his silver hair. "The same proof his mother found before she got too curious for her own good." Callum's world tilted on its axis. He gripped the wall for support as Maxwell's words confirmed what Nova had suspected. His mother's death hadn't been an accident. "At least I cleaned up that mess cleanly," Maxwell continued. "No one questioned a car accident, but kidnapping? In broad daylight? Now we have real problems." "We wouldn't have problems if you'd destroyed those letters like I told you to," Marion hissed. "Instead, you kept them as insurance." "Insurance we needed. Or have you forgotten how much money is at stake?" Maxwell's voice dropped dangerously. "The same money that's kept you in luxury all these years, Marion. Don't pretend your hands are clean." Callum felt sick. His aunt, the woman who had helped raise him, had knowingly trapped him in a prison of fear to protect a murderer. Every gentle word, every concerned warning about the family curse had been a calculated lie. The investigator touched his arm, drawing his attention to the guard rotation. One man had moved toward the loading dock, leaving a clearer path to Nova. They needed to act soon. Callum could see Nova's exhaustion in the slump of her shoulders. She had risked everything to help him find the truth. Now it was his turn to be brave for her. The investigator signaled their approach route, past the shipping pallets, behind the support columns, then a quick dash to Nova while he handled the guards. Callum nodded, pushing down his terror at the thought of crossing that exposed space. As Maxwell and Marion's argument moved toward the office area, Callum took his first step into the warehouse. Into danger. Into a world he'd hidden from for 30 years. For Nova, he would face it all. The chapter ends with Callum moving silently through the shadows, his fear still present, but no longer in control. Every step carries him closer to the woman who showed him that love was stronger than lies, stronger than fear, stronger than any curse. Callum followed the investigator's lead through the side entrance, his heart thundering in his chest. Years of isolation had left him unused to movement, but adrenaline carried him forward. The warehouse air hung heavy with dust and motor oil, making each careful breath feel thick in his lungs. The first guard never saw them coming. The investigator moved like a shadow, applying a precise chokehold that left the man unconscious within seconds. They lowered him silently to the concrete floor. The second guard turned at the soft scuff of shoes, but the investigator was already there. A brief scuffle ended with another quiet takedown. Callum stood frozen, amazed at the efficient precision of it all. "Clear," the investigator whispered. "Go to her. I'll secure the perimeter." Callum rushed to Nova, his feet carrying him across the space that separated them. Her head lifted at his approach, eyes widening with recognition. Even in the dim light, he could see dark bruises blooming along her cheekbone and jaw. "I knew you'd come," she whispered as he dropped to his knees beside her chair. Her voice was hoarse but steady. "I knew you wouldn't let fear win." His hands shook as he worked at the rope, binding her wrists. "I'm so sorry, Nova. This is all my fault." "No." Despite her exhaustion, her tone was firm. "This is Maxwell's fault. And Marion's, not yours." The ropes finally gave way under his trembling fingers. Nova rubbed her raw wrists, wincing slightly. Before Callum could suggest their escape, a door slammed somewhere in the warehouse. The police will be here any minute. Marion's voice echoed. We need to leave now. Get the files first. Maxwell snapped. We can't leave any evidence. They rounded the corner and froze, finding Nova freed and Callum standing beside her. Maxwell recovered first, his practiced charm sliding into place like a mask. Callum, my boy, this is all a terrible misunderstanding. Stop. Callum's voice rang out stronger than he'd ever heard it. No more lies. Maxwell's smile turned cold. Lies. I've built your entire empire. Everything you have exists because of my financial expertise. You mean your theft? Nova said quietly. The money you stole from his family? Theft is such an ugly word. Maxwell straightened his expensive suit jacket. I prefer to think of it as creative reallocation. Your mother was going to ruin everything with her pedestrian morality, Callum. She had to be stopped. Callum took a step forward, his hands clenched into fists. You killed her. The brakes on her car required such minimal tampering. Maxwell shrugged. A tragic accident, everyone agreed. And you, locked away in your self-imposed prison of guilt, never questioned anything. The perfect arrangement. Perfect. Nova's voice shook with anger. You destroyed his life. I protected our interests. Marion cut in, her usually perfect makeup smeared with nervous sweat. Everything I did was to preserve the family legacy. Callum turned to his aunt, decades of manipulation crystallizing into sharp focus. By lying to me? Making me believe I was cursed? You were so fragile after that incident with your little friend. Marion's voice took on the soothing tone she'd used throughout his childhood. The curse story gave you structure, purpose. It kept you safe. It kept me controlled? Callum corrected. While you and Maxwell stole millions. Billions, actually. Maxwell said with a hint of pride. Your isolation made everything so simple. Sign here. Trust me there. No awkward questions about missing funds or creative accounting. In the distance, police sirens began to wail. Maxwell's smug expression faltered slightly. Well, this has been an illuminating chat, he said, reaching into his jacket. But I'm afraid we'll have to cut it short. The investigator materialized from the shadows, his gun already drawn. I wouldn't, Mr. Reeve. Hands where I can see them. Maxwell slowly raised his hands, revealing the gun he'd been reaching for. Now, let's be reasonable. The police are already on their way, the investigator said calmly. And I've recorded this entire confession. It's been broadcasting live to secure servers. Marion made a small, broken sound. Maxwell, do something! But Maxwell only stood there, his mask of confidence cracking as red and blue lights began strobing through the warehouse windows. Within minutes, the building filled with police officers. Callum watched as Maxwell and Marion were led away in handcuffs, their protests falling on deaf ears. The reality of the moment felt surreal. 30 years of lies unraveling in a single night. He turned to find Nova swaying slightly on her feet. Without thinking, he moved to steady her, then caught himself and pulled back. It's okay, she whispered, reaching for his hand. I'm not afraid of your touch, Callum. I never was. Her fingers slipped into his, warm and real and grounding. Together, they walked towards the warehouse exit, where cool night air beckoned. Each step felt like awakening from a long, dark dream into a world of possibilities neither of them had dared to imagine. As they emerged under the star-filled sky, Nova squeezed his hand gently. Callum squeezed back, knowing that while the night's events had freed him from his past, it was Nova's unwavering faith that had truly broken his curse. The first hints of dawn painted the Colorado sky in whispers of pink and gold as Callum's car wound its way up the mountain road toward the estate. Nova sat quietly in the passenger seat, her eyes heavy with exhaustion after hours of giving statements to the police. The night's events felt almost dreamlike now. The warehouse, Maxwell's confession, Marion's arrest. But the slight tenderness in Nova's wrists reminded her it had all been terrifyingly real. Callum hadn't spoken much since they left the police station, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. He kept glancing at her every few minutes, as if afraid she might disappear. When they finally pulled up to the estate's main entrance, Nova noticed his hands trembling slightly as he turned off the engine. "Home," he said softly, more to himself than to her. The house staff had left warm lights on throughout the first floor, creating a welcoming glow that seemed to chase away the shadows of the night. Callum guided Nova inside with careful attention, maintaining a respectful distance while staying close enough to catch her if she stumbled. "Please sit," he said, gesturing to the plush sofa in the library, the room where they had spent so many hours together over the past days. "I'll make you some tea." Nova sank gratefully into the soft cushions, her body finally registering just how exhausted she was. "You don't have to," she started to say, but Callum was already heading toward the kitchen. "I want to," he called back. "The staff always brings it, but I need to do this myself. For you." She heard him moving around in the kitchen, opening cabinets and running water. A small smile touched her lips as she imagined. Him, a billionaire who had lived in isolation for decades, carefully preparing tea with his own hands. When he returned several minutes later, he carried a steaming cup with intense concentration. "I hope it's okay," he said, setting it on the table beside her. "I watched how they make it, but I've never actually done it myself before." Nova took a careful sip. The tea was a little too strong and slightly too sweet, but the warmth of his gesture made it perfect. "It's wonderful," she said honestly. Callum settled into an armchair nearby, his eyes never leaving her face. The silence between them felt comfortable, filled with unspoken understanding. As the sky outside gradually brightened, they simply existed in the same space, processing the dramatic shift their world had undergone. Around 8 o'clock in the morning, the medical team Callum had called arrived. The doctor and nurse were efficiently gentle as they examined Nova, checking her vital signs and the rope burns on her wrists. Callum paced anxiously nearby, his worry evident in every step. "You're going to be just fine," the doctor finally announced, applying a soothing ointment to Nova's wrists. "Some rest and care will take care of the physical effects. The emotional processing may take longer, but there's no lasting damage." After the medical team left, Callum's composure cracked. He sank into his chair, his face in his hands. "I'm so sorry, Nova," he whispered. "This is all my fault. If I hadn't brought you into this—" "Stop," Nova said firmly. She leaned forward, waiting until he looked up at her. "None of this was your fault. You were a victim too, Callum. Maxwell and Marion spent decades building their web of lies around you. But you could have been killed because of me, because you what? Because you dared to care about someone, because you finally started questioning the prison they built around you?" Nova's voice was gentle, but determined. "You're not cursed, Callum. You never were. The only curse was the lies they told you." Tears gathered in Callum's eyes. "How can you be so sure?" "Because I know your heart," she said simply. "I've seen the gentle way you care for others, even from a distance. I've watched you struggle to overcome decades of fear just to take small steps toward connection. That's not a cursed person. That's someone who was hurt and manipulated by people he should have been able to trust." The morning light streamed through the library windows as they talked, their conversation flowing naturally between moments of comfortable silence. They spoke of healing, of the long journey ahead to rebuild trust in themselves and others. Callum shared his determination to restore his mother's reputation and expose every detail of Maxwell and Marion's schemes. "I'll make it right," he said, his voice stronger now. "Every lie they told, every person they hurt. I'll make sure the truth comes out. My mother deserved better than to die trying to stop their crimes alone." Nova nodded, fighting back a yawn. "She'd be proud of you, Callum. She never stopped believing in you. That's why she left those coded messages. She knew someday you'd find the strength to break free." The emotional and physical exhaustion of the past 24 hours began to catch up with Nova. Her eyes grew heavy as she curled up on the sofa, Callum's voice becoming a soothing murmur as he continued talking about his plans for the future. When she drifted off to sleep, Callum fell silent. He watched her for a moment, struck by how much trust she placed in him, how completely she believed in his goodness, despite everything that had happened. Moving quietly, he retrieved a soft blanket from a nearby chest and gently draped it over her sleeping form. Instead of returning to his chair, he settled on the floor beside the sofa. The morning sun warmed the room as he sat guard over her rest, his heart full of gratitude for the woman who had helped him rediscover his courage and reclaim his life. For the first time in 30 years, Callum felt truly at peace. Nova woke slowly, sunlight warming her face through the living room windows. For a moment, she felt disoriented, then remembered falling asleep on the sofa the night before. The blanket Callum had draped over her was still tucked around her shoulders. A familiar voice drew her attention to the television mounted on the wall. Her breath caught as she saw Callum standing at a podium, addressing dozens of reporters. His shoulders were straight, his voice steady despite the slight tremor in his hands. "For 30 years, I lived in isolation because of carefully crafted lies," he was saying. "My mother, Eleanor Vance, discovered massive financial fraud within our company shortly before her death. What was reported as a tragic accident was, in fact, a deliberate murder orchestrated by Maxwell Reeve to prevent her from exposing his crimes." Nova sat up, pulling the blanket closer as she watched Callum speak with quiet authority. The ticker at the bottom of the screen identified this as a live press conference from the Vance Industries headquarters in Denver. My Aunt Marion, working with Maxwell Reeve, perpetuated a false story about a family curse to keep me isolated and emotionally dependent. They manipulated my childhood trauma to maintain control over both me and my mother's estate. Their deception ends today. Cameras flashed as Callum paused, his gaze steady. "I am announcing full cooperation with federal investigators and providing all evidence of the financial crimes committed by Maxwell Reeve. Additionally, I am establishing an independent review of all company transactions dating back to my mother's death." Nova felt tears welling up as she watched him stand tall before the world, no longer hiding. His next words made her heart skip. "In honor of my mother's memory and the remarkable librarian who helped uncover the truth, I am donating $500 million to establish a national literacy initiative. This program will support community libraries, literacy education, and archival preservation across the country." The reporters erupted with questions, but Callum remained composed. He answered each inquiry directly, no longer afraid of interaction or judgment. Nova watched him handle the pressure with growing confidence, seeing how far he'd come from the man who couldn't bear to be touched. When the press conference ended, Nova waited anxiously in the living room. Within an hour, she heard Callum's car returning to the estate. As he walked through the door, she saw both exhaustion and triumph in his face. Without hesitation, Nova crossed the room and wrapped her arms around him. She felt him tense for just a moment before melting into the embrace, his arms encircling her waist as he buried his face in her hair. "You did it," she whispered, feeling his shoulders shake with emotion. "You were so brave." I couldn't have done any of it without you," he murmured against her hair. They stood holding each other for several long moments, neither wanting to let go. Finally, Callum drew back slightly, his eyes bright with unshed tears. "Would you join me for lunch in the conservatory?" Nova smiled, linking her arm through his. "I'd love to." They walked together through the estate, the atmosphere noticeably lighter than it had been just days ago. The conservatory gleamed as they entered, sunlight streaming through the glass walls and ceiling. Tropical plants created a peaceful sanctuary around the small table where lunch was laid out. "This feels like the first day of something new," Callum said as they settled into their seats. The sunlight played across his features, highlighting a piece she'd never seen there before. Over lunch they talked about the future, both immediate and long-term. Callum spoke about restructuring his company, implementing new transparency measures, and working with investigators to ensure justice for his mother. "The literacy initiative," Nova said, still amazed by his announcement. "That's going to change so many lives." Callum reached across the table and took her hand, a gesture that would have been unthinkable just weeks ago. "You showed me the power of words, of truth preserved in writing. My mother's letters helped expose decades of lies. It seems fitting to honor that by supporting literacy and libraries." After lunch, Callum suggested something unprecedented, a walk around the estate grounds. Nova agreed immediately, knowing what a significant step this was for him. As they stepped outside, Callum reached for her hand naturally, their fingers intertwining. They walked slowly along the winding paths, past carefully tended gardens and through groves of aspen trees. The mountain air was crisp and clean, carrying the scent of pine and wildflowers. "I never thought I'd be able to do this," Callum admitted softly. "Just walk and hold someone's hand. I spent so many years convinced my touch would bring harm." Nova squeezed his hand gently. "And now? Now I'm learning to trust myself again, to trust others." He stopped walking, turning to face her. "You restored my faith, Nova, not just in humanity but in myself. You saw past all the walls I'd built and helped me find the courage to tear them down." They continued walking until they reached the estate's eastern overlook. Below them, the valley stretched out in breathtaking beauty, peaks rising in the distance against a clear blue sky. They stood together in comfortable silence, still holding hands, letting the magnitude of change wash over them. The future stretched before them like the vast landscape, wide open, full of possibility. Nova looked at Callum, seeing not the isolated billionaire she'd first met, but a man who had found his strength and reclaimed his life. The sunlight caught his smile as he gazed at the horizon, no longer afraid to face what lay ahead. The evening settled over the estate like a gentle blanket, stars beginning to peek through the darkening sky. In the kitchen, Callum moved with careful purpose, preparing dinner himself instead of relying on staff. He had asked them to take the evening off, wanting this moment to be intimate and personal. Nova watched from the doorway, touched by his concentration as he arranged fresh herbs on perfectly grilled salmon. The kitchen, usually a space occupied by others, felt different with just the two of them, warmer, more alive. "I've never cooked for anyone before," Callum admitted, a slight flush coloring his cheeks. "The recipes seemed simple enough, but—" Nova smiled, stepping closer. "It looks wonderful. Can I help with anything?" "Just your company," he replied softly, placing the final touches on their plates. They ate at the small breakfast nook rather than the formal dining room, the space cozy and informal. Candlelight danced across the table between them as they shared the meal Callum had prepared, salmon with roasted vegetables, fresh bread, and a light white wine. "This is delicious," Nova said sincerely, watching Callum's face light up with pleasure at the praise. After dinner, they naturally gravitated towards the library. The room held such significance now. It was where everything had started, where truth had emerged from decades of lies, where the first tentative bonds between them had formed. The evening light filtered through the tall windows, casting long shadows across the book-lined walls. Nova ran her fingers along the spines of nearby volumes, remembering how it felt those first days, discovering his mother's letters and uncovering the truth that would change everything. Callum stood beside the fireplace, watching her with soft eyes. After a moment, he crossed the room and gently took both her hands in his. The gesture, so simple yet so meaningful given his history, made Nova's heart skip. "I've been thinking," he said quietly, his thumbs tracing circles on her palms. "Everyone talked about breaking the curse, about magic and fate. But that's not what you did." Nova squeezed his hands encouragingly, letting him find the words. "You didn't break my curse," Callum continued, his voice thick with emotion. "You gave me my life back. You showed me the truth with patience and kindness. You believed in me when I couldn't believe in myself." Tears pricked at Nova's eyes as she looked up at him. "Healing isn't magic," she replied softly. "It's choosing love, every day. It's having the courage to trust again, to try again, even when it's scary." Callum released one of her hands to gently cup her cheek. The movement was natural now, without the fear that had haunted him for so long. He leaned in slowly, and Nova met him halfway. Their lips came together in a kiss that held all the tenderness of new love and all the promise of tomorrow. When they finally parted, they settled onto the comfortable leather sofa, where they had spent so many hours reviewing letters and uncovering truths. Now they turned their thoughts to the future. "I'd like to continue the archival project," Nova said, curled comfortably against his side. "There's still so much history here to preserve, so many stories to honor." Callum nodded, his arms secure around her shoulders. "I'd like that, and I've been thinking about taking some small steps into the world again. Maybe start with dinner at a quiet restaurant or a walk in town." "We'll take it at your pace," Nova assured him. "There's no rush. We can build this new life one day at a time." They talked softly about possibilities, weekend trips to nearby towns, gradually expanding Callum's comfort zone, working together to merge their lives thoughtfully and intentionally. They discussed Nova possibly moving to the estate, not immediately, but soon, letting their relationship grow naturally. As the night deepened, they finally stood to head to their respective rooms. But instead of parting ways immediately, they walked the quiet hallways together, their footsteps echoing softly on the hardwood floors. The estate felt different now, no longer a fortress of isolation, but a home filled with hope. They paused at the grand balcony doors on the second floor. Callum opened them, and they stepped out into the cool mountain air. The moon hung full and bright above them, painting the mountain peaks in silver light. The valley below was peaceful, stretching endlessly toward the horizon. Nova leaned against the balcony railing, Callum's arm wrapped securely around her waist. The night was perfect, clear and still, with stars scattered like diamonds across the velvet sky. Everything felt possible now, every future they could imagine within reach. They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the moonlight play across the mountains. Both knew that this was just the beginning, of healing, of love, of a life built on truth and trust rather than fear and isolation. Whatever came next, they would face it together, choosing love every day, finding courage in each other's strength. The mountain breeze carried the scent of pine and promise, wrapping around them like a blessing as they stood at the threshold of their new beginning. The morning sun crept over the mountain peaks, painting the Colorado sky in gentle strokes of pink and gold. Nova woke slowly in her guest room, her heart warm with memories of the previous evening's tender moments and whispered promises. She dressed thoughtfully in a soft blue sweater and comfortable slacks, drawn to return to the balcony where she and Callum had stood beneath the stars. As she stepped into the hallway, the familiar scent of Earl Grey tea wafted through the air. Making her way to the second-floor balcony, she found Callum already there, 2 steaming mugs waiting on the stone railing. He wore casual clothing, a departure from his usual formal attire, and his posture held none of the tension that had defined him for so long. "I thought you might come here," he said softly, offering her one of the mugs. His smile was easy, natural. "It feels different now," Nova replied, taking in the sweeping mountain vista before them. "Everything does." They stood in comfortable silence, watching the sun climb higher over the peaks. The morning air was crisp and clean, carrying the promise of new beginnings. "I'd like to finish organizing the archive room today," Callum said after a while. "Not because we have to, but because it feels right, to honor my mother's truth properly." Nova nodded, understanding completely. "Together?" "Together," he agreed. After breakfast, they made their way to the library. Nova carefully retrieved the remaining letters, handling each one with reverence as she restored them to their proper chronological order. Beside her, Callum methodically gathered the altered documents, the physical evidence of decades of manipulation, and sealed them in protective folders for the legal proceedings. "These need to be part of the official record," he said firmly. "Every lie exposed, every truth preserved." Nova watched him work, noting how his hands remained steady now when touching the papers that had once caused him such distress. The morning passed in peaceful productivity, their shared purpose bringing a sense of closure to the painful chapters of the past. As afternoon approached, Callum surprised her by suggesting they drive into town. Nova's heart swelled at his courage. This would be his first voluntary venture into the community in decades. "Are you sure?" she asked gently. "With you?" "Yes," he replied, his voice certain despite the flutter of nervousness in his eyes. The drive was quiet but comfortable, Callum's knuckles only slightly white on the steering wheel as they navigated the winding mountain roads. When they pulled up outside the community library where Nova had worked, her former colleagues rushed out to greet her. Sarah, the head librarian, wrapped Nova in a tearful hug. "We were so worried when we heard what happened." While Nova reassured her friends, Callum slipped quietly inside to speak with the library board. When he emerged 30 minutes later, the entire staff stood in shocked silence. He had established a substantial literacy fund in Nova's name, ensuring her passion for books and learning would continue to touch lives long into the future. The sun was beginning its descent when they returned to the estate. Nova insisted on preparing dinner herself, shooing away the kitchen staff with a gentle smile. Callum moved around the dining room, setting places with careful precision, occasionally catching her eye through the doorway and sharing a warm glance. "I never knew simple things could feel this good," he admitted as they sat down to eat. "Just being normal." Nova reached across the table to squeeze his hand. "Normal is beautiful when you're free to enjoy it." After dinner, Nova tugged playfully at his sleeve. "Come on, I want to show you something." She led him out to the garden, where stone paths wound between carefully tended flower beds. They walked slowly, hands linked, talking about dreams that now felt possible, traveling to quiet beaches, exploring small towns, building a life that balanced Callum's need for peace with a gentle opening to the world. Maybe we could start with weekend trips, he suggested. Short distances at first, then gradually further. Nova's heart lifted at the way he was already planning their future together. That sounds perfect. We'll take it one step at a time. No rushing. As twilight settled over the garden, Callum stopped beneath an old oak tree. I never thought I'd have this, he said quietly. A future that felt unlimited, free. I always knew you were in there, Nova replied softly. Behind all the fear and isolation, you just needed truth to set you free, and love to help you breathe again. The first stars were appearing overhead when Callum turned to face her fully. His hands were steady and sure as they cradled her face, no trace of the trembling that had marked his early attempts at touch. When he kissed her, it was with the confidence of a man who finally knew himself, who understood that love was stronger than fear. They walked back to the warmly lit house arm in arm, their steps matched and unhurried. They were no longer a man haunted by imaginary curses and a woman trying to help him heal. They were partners, equals, choosing each day to build something beautiful from the ashes of their broken pasts. Thank you for being here. If something in this story stayed with you, I'd love to see you again. Subscribe, and tomorrow I'll bring you another story crafted with heart.